LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, reflections on what I've learned from the last year of this podcast and how I'm going to live differently as a result. My kids sometimes say to me, "Dad, you're so lucky. You don't have to go to school. You get to do whatever you want." This always strikes me as funny for a few reasons, one of which is hosting this podcast feels a little bit like going back to school. A book every week, an interview each week, that's a lot of learning. As these conversations stack up, something interesting happens. I start to see that these conversations are in conversation with each other. Different ideas, often from very different thinkers, start overlapping and refining one another, and all of a sudden they fit into my mental model of the world and change how I see things. Which leads me to today's episode. I want to try something different. I want to share with you the 3 big life lessons I learned hosting the show in the last year, thanks to conversations with all of our brilliant guests, but in particular, Michael Lewis, Cal Newport, Oliver Burkeman, Sarah Walker, Seth Godin, Yuval Noah Harari, Bill Gates, and Reid Hoffman. I hope that this somewhat different episode will accomplish a few things. I'll introduce you to thinkers and ideas that you may have missed. You'll hear from them directly in some of our favorite highlights from the last year's episodes. You'll hear my takeaways from the year and resolutions I've made to make changes in my own life that might be relevant for you as well. And at the end, I'll share some of my intentions for this podcast in 2025. That's all coming up right after this quick break.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, host of Everyday Better, an award-winning podcast dedicated to personal development. Join me every week for captivating stories and research to find more fulfillment in your work and personal life. Listen to Everyday Better on the LinkedIn Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Tomer Cohen, LinkedIn's Chief Product Officer. If you're just as curious as I am about the way things are built, then tune into my podcast, Building One. I speak with some of the best product builders out there.
I've always been inspired by frustration. It came back to my own personal pain point.
So we had to go out to farmers and convince them.
Following that curiosity is a superpower.
You have to be obsessed with the human condition.
Listen to Building One on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
There is joy in the very best work and work in the very best joy. That's the first big lesson I learned this year. There's joy in the very best work and work in the very best joy. One of the great privileges of my last 12 months was the opportunity to have a conversation with the great American storyteller, Michael Lewis. You know Michael Lewis, Moneyball, The Big Short, Flash Boys. I learned from my conversation with Michael that he is not only a keen observer and storyteller, but also an expert liver of life. These skills feed each other. Michael's a great writer because he has an unusual ability to take pleasure in the world around him. He's been this way since he was a teenager. When you were in 10th grade, you said to your English teacher, "Dr. Francis, are you always this pleasant, or is this just an especially good day for you?" You were sent to the headmaster's office. What did he say to you?
His name was Teddy Cotonio, and he's one of the great characters ever to have emerged from New Orleans. He was 5'4" and 300 pounds, and he had a big bald head and a big smile, and was very witty and caustic, and taught the greatest Russian literature class I've ever taken. Anyway, Teddy Cotonio, who had known me at that point basically for 11 years because I'd been in his school since kindergarten, he looks at me and he says, "Michael, why say that?" He goes, "I know she's not fun to be around, but why? Why are you here?" kind of thing. And I said, she pissed me off, right? And he said, "Okay." He said, "Let's think strategically about how to deal with those emotions," kind of thing. And by the end of it, we were kind of laughing. And what he said to me in the end was, "You're like the happiest person I know. I see you walking around here. You have no reason to be happy. You're not successful. You don't get good grades. You're not a star on the sports team. You just seem really happy. You're blessed with those genes. Make them work for you, not against you," kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that I was using my moment of fury with Dr. Francis to have a great deal of fun, I thought, at her expense. And it did make the class laugh, but he said you got to kind of control it.
Well, and you said that in that moment you had this recognition that this was true from your perspective, that you might have been the happiest person that you had met, and 10th grade was maybe the worst year of your life, and it's gotten incrementally better.
I didn't frame my life as happy, unhappy, but when he said it, I realized, yeah, like this is absolutely true. I just got that gene and I completely get it. And even though I'm in the worst place of my life, it's still there.
And this may be why your books sell as well as they do and create so much joy, because you're just experiencing and communicating joy in the world. And potentially your critics would say you're having too much fun.
That's probably true. I mean, I suppose that's a fair charge, because I am very self-consciously running towards pleasure. That's what draws me to material in the first place. I'm drawn towards that because I'm drawn towards the emotion, that I want to be in that emotional space. And that's how I get there fastest. I don't get there through sadness. I don't get there through like depression. And I just don't get there that way.
Yeah.
I can get to sadness, but I have to get there through happiness.
This really hit home for me because I've always been this way. I've always run towards pleasure. And I've sometimes felt guilty about this and uncertain, frankly, whether it's the most effective strategy. But as I learned from Michael, the joy is a signal that what you're doing has emotional resonance, and it may for other people too. Here's another wonderful detail about Michael Lewis. He thinks of himself as lazy. My natural state, he says, is probably inert. I can really just lay around and screw off and procrastinate with the best of them. Let's pause for a moment here. Michael Lewis is a legend. He's written more than a dozen books, including Moneyball, The Blind Side, The Big Short. The movies made based on those 3 books grossed over $550 million. In his spare time, he hosts the popular podcast Against the Rules and recently started a new series of articles for The Washington Post to tell the stories of government workers. In what world is he lazy? Here's the funny thing. Michael sees his laziness as a tool. Sloth and indolence, he says, serve as a kind of filter. It changes my relationship to potential stories and potential material. It requires the material to rise to the level of interest where you feel obliged to engage with it. Michael is reluctant to take on new projects. He abandons many of them, but when he takes one up, he really gets into it. He runs towards pleasure. And we feel it too. This, no doubt, is why his writing is so powerful. This dovetails nicely with what we learned from our conversation last year with computer scientist Cal Newport about his latest book, Slow Productivity. It boils down to 3 principles: do fewer things, work at a natural pace, and obsess over quality. When we work in this way, at a natural pace, putting love into the product, it is a far more joyful experience. And here's the surprising thing. We actually get more done. When we're freed from the panic that time is passing us by, we're immersed in our work and play, and we do it better, and time slows down. We can find our way to this place Cal's way by slowing down and obsessing on the quality of our work, in which case joy is a byproduct. Or we can get there Michael Lewis's way by setting out in search of joy, in which case good work naturally follows. So here's a connection I'm going to make. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but it's working for me. Just as there is profound joy in doing great work, the joy of living, joie de vivre, as the French like to say, takes work. We need resistance and challenge to experience the joy of engagement. Stanford psychiatrist Anna Lembke, another one of my favorite guests, explained the neurochemistry of this in our 2021 conversation about the hedonic set point. our natural tendency to acclimate to both positive and negative experiences. Pleasure exists on the other side of discomfort. Either choose your preferred form of discomfort, say the bracing chill of jumping in the ocean or the ache of a good run, or it will choose you. You just can't have the radiant joy of lying on the beach, feeling the ocean water evaporate off your skin. This is one of my favorite feelings, without the bite of the cold ocean minutes ago when you jumped in. The two are intertwined. So all of this is to say, there is joy in the very best work and work in the very best joy. How will I apply these learnings in 2025? I'm going to choose guests for the podcast that most fascinate me. I'm going to look for the joy like Michael Lewis, put love and joy into our product, into every communication from the Next Big Idea Club. And I'm going to pursue hobbies and exercise and pursuits in my spare time that also commingle challenge and joy. I'm going to commingle exercise and friends, hiking, racket sports, skiing, adventures. And I'm going to try to do the same with my family, with my wife and my 3 wonderful boys, even though they are sometimes, I like to joke, thin-skinned, milk-toasty city boys. But I know you can do it. The best vacations are ones where we engage in physical adventure that includes moments of challenge. This is my aspiration, anyway, for the coming year. My second revelation from our last year of this podcast is a little esoteric, but stick with me here. I think it's pretty interesting. Are you ready for it? Insight number 2. Wisdom requires seeing time. We humans have a peculiar relationship with the concept of time. We talk about it as something outside of us, something that slips away or passes us by. However, it's more accurate and useful, I think, to see time as the medium in which we exist, the dimension that makes life possible. We are time, in a sense, and most of what is worth wanting, great relationships, fulfilling, purposeful work, enchanting adventure, can be realized in due time. Of course, accepting time as a dance partner requires humility and patience, and I don't always have that patience. We usually can't have what we want right now, and this can be frustrating. Why must this be so? Because everything we do that matters, everything important, we do in partnerships with other people, either individuals or systems that are composed of people, and people move at their own speed. I learned from Sarah Walker, the silver-tongued theoretical physicist and author of the new book, Life as No One Knows It, something that may at first seem to be unrelated, but it's connected for me to this notion of seeing time. Sarah says that to understand an organism, a human for instance, it's necessary to understand the 4.2 billion years of evolutionary history that was necessary for its complexity to become possible. There is a physicality to time, Sarah likes to say. Our bodies embody the time it took for us to be assembled. It's worth listening to a clip of Sarah talking about this.
When we say the matter we're made of doesn't have life in it, it suggests to me that we're missing a material property. And that material property, I would say, is the causal structure information embedded in time, which is what assembly theory is trying to get at. So I think this idea that you can reduce you to your atoms and you're just some emergent property, has completely erased time as actually being a physical property of evolved objects.
Yes.
And this to me is the critical thing that's missing, is that time actually has a physicality to it, and it has a physicality to it in the process of evolution, because evolved objects require time for their construction. They require time to form on a planet. Why are we talking about the origin of life happening 4.2 billion years ago? Because all that evolutionary history is necessary from such an event to get to things that can talk about it that way.
Isn't she a trip? I just love listening to Sarah. This idea that we physically embody our history is also useful metaphorically, I think, because, of course, as human beings, we each contain the history that has brought us to this moment, only some of which was in our control. I mean, when we were babies or children, that was not in our control. And every person with whom we interact is an unwitting product of a different history. We carry it with us. We are our history. I learned from Oliver Burkeman, with whom I had a wonderful conversation about his new book, Meditations for Mortals, this notion that we should think of time as inside of us, not outside of us, and we should accept our limitations, our finitude, as he says, our lack of control. The more we try to render the world controllable, he says, the more it eludes us, the more daily life loses its resonance, its capacity to touch, move, and absorb us. Isn't that nice? I learned from Oliver that to be truly immersed in precious moments, to be present for them, and to have more of them, you have to treat them, ironically, as if they're not precious. Okay, so time is not something outside us that's passing us by. We are time. And our lack of control of our existence is what makes life enchanting. Life, when you think about it, is about relationships. And a relationship you control is not, in fact, a relationship. We can exert a kind of limited control, but only in a patient relationship with time. These insights from Sarah and Oliver converge with something I learned from marketing guru Seth Godin and his latest book, This is Strategy. He says most humans don't see time. This phrase comes from Seth. Central to This is Strategy is the insight that the world is composed of inescapable systems. The art market, for instance, is a system with a range of stakeholders who benefit and others who are excluded. The wedding industrial complex is a system that's highly effective at separating you from your money. The ride-sharing business is a system that has largely replaced the taxi system that preceded it. It's next to impossible to stop a system that's working for the people who participate in it. What you can do is interact with systems wisely and build new, better systems that over time replace existing ones, much as the founders of Uber replaced taxis. This requires patience. Systems change typically over a period of decades. So what is strategy? Seth says it's what we can do today with knowledge of the systems with which we interact to make tomorrow better.
I think almost no one knows what strategy is. I think they're confused. They think it's goals or tactics or the job to be done today. It's none of those things. And the number of people who have actual intent, systemic awareness, who can see time and who bring empathy to the change they seek to make is vanishingly close to zero. What I'm saying is, our grandparents grew up in a world where they knew exactly what they needed to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
That tomorrow was like yesterday, but they had to work harder. Now, every single person listening to this, I am saying without fear of error, gets to decide at some level what they're going to do tomorrow. And if you're not making that decision with intent, then it doesn't matter how fast you're going if you're going in the wrong direction.
Let me try to tie all this together with an analogy. These three conversations with Sarah Walker, Oliver Burkeman, and Seth Godin help me see more clearly that building a beautiful life is like gardening. This is at odds with other metaphors we commonly use, that life is a battle or a journey, because great gardeners see time. They understand when certain actions are critical, the right inputs of water, light, and soil, the relationship between neighboring plants, and what outcomes are reasonable in due time. A good gardener is patient, unperturbed by the cycles of the seasons, appreciative of the stages through which living things express themselves. I have not always had this patience. I've sometimes thought of life as a battle, me the hero, macheting my way through the day, or perhaps an explorer paddling with or sometimes against the current. And there's certainly times for valiant action. But when I look back at the mindset that has produced the best outcomes in my life to date, it's been the persistent, loving, sometimes patient attention of a gardener. So how will this resolution to do a better job seeing time affect my actual behavior in 2025 and beyond? Well, this remains to be seen, but here are my intentions. For one thing, I'd like to be more tuned into taking small actions to invest in relationships, a little bit like quickly watering plants. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, but the text message or phone call or voice message, confession for friends who are listening, I sometimes am happy when the voicemail picks up. This small action can be a great way to quickly share the love with people in your life. In business, I find it's helpful to be really mindful of the macro environment, right? The systems. How is the wind shifting? Is it at your back? Is it a headwind? When you're heading into the wind, just surviving is winning. When the wind is at your back, it's a great time to run faster, really capitalize on opportunities. And as with personal relationships, the right small acts of outreach can make a huge difference, like planting seeds. When the timing for the right partnership or communication is aligned, a small action can have an outsized effect. Other times, you're just spinning your wheels. Finally, in personal finance, I believe it's essential to think really long term. Understanding the astounding power of compounding interest and the equally powerful ability for spending habits and interest payments to compound. Scott Galloway was really good on this in our conversation. He said, as a young person, you should think of the time in front of you as a valuable asset.
The majority of the advantage of the people in this room is that you're going to live another 60 years. If you can save $300 a month from this point forward in some sort of tax-deferred vehicle, when you're my age, you're going to have millions of dollars.
And he's absolutely right. And that applies to all of us who hopefully have decades rather than years ahead of us. Time is money, not just because you can sell it. I think that's what people usually mean when they say time is money, but because time makes possible the compounding growth of money, and compounding growth is exponential. You have to see time to appreciate this. All right. After the break, we'll get to the next and final insight, which is that to create the future we want, we first need to imagine it. We'll be right back.
Hey you, I'm Andrew Seaman. Do you want a new job? Or do you want to move forward in your career? Well, you should listen to my weekly show called Get Hired with Andrew Seaman. We talk about it all, and it's waiting for you, yes you, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Tomer Cohen, LinkedIn's Chief Product Officer. If you're just as curious as I am about the way things are built, the insights behind what it takes to create a world-renowned product, then tune into my podcast, Building One. There's so much to learn, like how Patagonia innovates with its supply chain.
We had to go out to farmers and convince them. It was really damn hard.
Or the way Adobe thinks about the first interaction somebody has with Photoshop.
I was always so fascinated by how people navigate and find their way.
Ever wanted to know how Nike builds emotion into the Jordan brand?
You have to be obsessed with the current state of the human condition.
And it doesn't stop there. What about how Glean reinvented knowledge search with AI? You can learn about how a Michelin star chef is redesigning seeds for flavor and how Pixar is nurturing a creative culture. Listen to Building One on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, drum roll. Our final insight. Number 3. Imagining the future we want to experience is a precondition for realizing it. Even to me, annoyingly relentless in my optimism, I'm the kind of person who's happy for plants when it rains. The future has felt kind of frightening at times in recent years. Will MacAskill, the Oxford philosopher who helped create the effective altruism movement, compared this moment in human history in our 2022 conversation to humanity's drunk adolescence. This really stuck with me. Our species is like a liquored-up teen swerving between lampposts, foot on the accelerator. If we survive the next 100 years, Will told us, trillions of future humans could enjoy tens of thousands of years of unimaginably wonderful human experience. In the next few decades, technology has the potential to deliver a world of superabundance, powered by clean energy, free of the scarcity that drives geopolitical conflict. This is really genuinely exciting. If we aren't careful, however, autocrats could take control of these all-powerful technologies, leading to thousands of years of Orwellian dystopia. No pressure, guys, but we kind of got to figure this out in the next 50 years. Yuval Noah Harari, in his new book, Nexus, describes what's at stake in greater detail. Every breakthrough in communication technology, Yuval told us, from the first markings on clay tablets with sticks to the algorithms that power social networks, has changed culture, politics, and governance. That's why Yuval sees AI, which is shaping up to be the dominant communication technology of our lifetimes, as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it could transform education, improve quality of life around the world, and usher in a more enlightened politics. On the other hand, AI-powered surveillance could tip the scales in favor of totalitarian regimes. Harari told me in a live conversation in September,
democracies are built on top of information technology. It's not something on the side. And when you have a major upheaval in information technology, you have an earthquake in democracies. And we are experiencing it right now all over the world. And if we don't pay attention and do something about it, democracy might collapse in the next few years because of this information revolution.
Sobering, right? But the question remains, how can we prudently develop these technologies in the midst of fierce global competition? When I asked Bill Gates if we should slow down the pace of AI development, here's what he said.
If we knew how to slow it down, a lot of people would probably say, okay, let's consider doing that. But the incentive structures don't really have some mechanism that's all that plausible of how that would happen.
What I heard Bill saying here was there are no brakes on the car. We don't know how to slow this process down. We are in a vehicle with the accelerator stuck on the floor. Of course, Bill also believes a world free of disease and scarcity is likely coming. So much so that he worries about human purpose in a world in which we no longer have hard problems to solve. So he too sees a future that could be truly extraordinary and beautiful for humanity if we do it right. I've spent a fair amount of time in the last couple of years worrying about the downside and appreciating the upside of our current dizzying pace of technological progress. And the conclusion I've come to is this. It is necessary and important work to imagine in some detail the future we want. Imagining it, of course, is a necessary first step if we would like to bring it into existence. It matters that we engage in this process collectively at scale because fear of the future is itself one of the challenges that we have to navigate. And it's a natural instinct, fear of change. But change is coming. And our fear has the potential to foment social unrest and, in our panic, make us susceptible to populist leaders who often only care about themselves. The prediction we can make with the greatest confidence is that our world is about to change dramatically. For the better, I believe, if we choose to make it so. Sarah Walker said in our conversation that imagination is a physical act. I think she means this from a neurochemical perspective. Every thought is, in reality, a cascade of neurons firing, an intricate symphony of electrical signals and chemical exchanges, synapses bridging, neurotransmitters flowing, circuits lighting up in rhythmic waves, sparking ideas that spill beyond the mind and into the world. This physicality of thinking can drive change. AI developers leaving more profit-driven companies like OpenAI to create more ethical ones like Anthropic. Politicians championing policies that redistribute wealth. Employers paying fair wages. People tipping a little more. Musicians playing in the streets. Imagination moves matter within us, between us, and catalyzes change. So let's engage together in a small act of imagination. I like to think about the future of our cities, which soon will be filled with driverless electric vehicles in a range of sizes, from inexpensive one-person vehicles to party buses to sleeper cars for evening trips to the country. The revolution is underway. Waymo currently does 150,000 driverless rides a week in San Francisco, LA, and Phoenix, and is launching soon in Austin, Miami, and Atlanta. Cities will be cleaner, safer, and quieter. Autonomous electric vehicles eliminating the need for horns and sirens, making the streets safer and removing the particulate diesel exhaust that covers our cities with soot. I live in New York City. I can see a version of it in 15 years that is so much quieter, cleaner, faster to get around, more plants and vegetation, more life, if that's possible. Within a few years, flying human-scale electric drones, eVTOLs, quieter and cheaper than helicopters and exhaust-free, will be offering quick flights to major airports. Within a decade, air taxi services will seamlessly connect suburban and rural areas with major city centers. In other words, we're finally getting flying cars. In 10 to 20 years, a large portion of jobs in restaurant kitchens and warehouses and retail and manufacturing and delivery will be automated, including the likely deployment of tens of millions of humanoid robots. The most repetitive white-collar labor, like the work of attorneys and surgeons, at least some of them, will likely be automated as well. It's easy, of course, to imagine the downside of this future, and that's important too. We could have rampant unemployment, ever-increasing concentration of wealth, societal unrest, a widespread crisis of purpose. But we can conjure just as easily the version of this future that we want. Superabundance could make a healthy life free of repetitive labor available to all if we act with generosity and foresight. Communities of artists and musicians and dancers and poets and philosophers could flourish. But all of that is still a ways away. What's coming this week, this month, this year? Well, Sal Khan, founder of the Khan Academy, told us he's excited about the imminent availability of personalized AI tutors for every child, enabling teachers to do their best work, and all of us to learn more seamlessly throughout our lives. We talked with Jamie Metzel, author of Superconvergence, about radical improvements to human health through personalized precision healthcare, bioengineered spider silk that's 3 times stronger than Kevlar, the development of lab-grown meats that could return millions of acres of land to their natural state. Ever more efficient renewable energy could help us capture carbon, reduce emissions, and at least mitigate the worst effects of climate change. And finally, I just talked last week with Reid Hoffman about the potentially transformative power of always-on AI assistance.
And not only will we have one agent, maybe it'll also be multiple agents. And by the way, the agents will be coordinating with each other. Like, for example, you have a research agent and you have a go buy stuff agent and you have an answer your phone agent. And it could just be different hats of the same technology. But that kind of thing, I think that is literally line of sight.
In other words, we will each have the equivalent of a full staff of brilliant advisors currently enjoyed by billionaires, like Reid Hoffman. This in turn could have the effect of increasing everyone's EQ and IQ, which could improve our ability to collaborate, make sensible decisions as a society, and improve our lives in most every dimension. No guarantees, but there's a path, according to our wise and learned podcast guests of the last year, to a better world in the coming decades. There are also, of course, catastrophic risks. I'm deeply concerned about AI alignment and containment and the way these technologies can empower surveillance states. But I'm convinced by Reid Hoffman and Bill Gates and Sarah Walker that it is our job to imagine the world we want. Imagination is a physical act. So I look forward to exploring all these topics with you in the coming year. We'll be talking, as always, with some of the leading thinkers in the world. We'll continue to explore on this show the big questions. How can we better understand ourselves individually, collectively? How can we create the future that we aspire to? And in the meantime, savor the world that we have. I know for me, this will be challenging at times. I will be struggling to balance the demands of our business with the time-consuming work of trying to be a great dad to 3 boys, all teenagers now, and a great husband, or at least good enough, and invest in all the wonderful friendships in my life. I'll try to balance all this with the joy of reading books and talking with our brilliant guests. There will be joy in the work, undoubtedly, and work in the joy. Thank you all, as always, for listening and contributing to our community. Do you have questions, ideas, comments? I would love to hear from you. You can email me directly at rufus@nextbigideaclub.com. That's Rufus, R-U-F-U-S, at nextbigideaclub.com. Should you be inspired to share this show or leave a nice rating or comment, we would so appreciate it. It really helps us out. If you'd like to listen to any of the conversations mentioned in this episode, we put them all in a Spotify playlist, which you can find in the show notes. Today's episode was produced and edited by Caleb Bissinger. Thank you, Caleb, for the edits. Sound design by Mike Toda. The Next Big Idea is a proud member of the LinkedIn Podcast Network. I continue to be Rufus Griscom. See you next week.